my ex-wife and I, who I'm very close with today, we were actually on the phone. She says, "Are you going to talk about me on the podcast?" And I said, "Yeah," because she's still one of my closest friends. And just because, we didn't stay married forever and ever doesn't mean that it was a failure. I think we're doing really well right now. We actually took a family trip to Israel with her and her parents and my wife and my dad and my kids. And it was amazing. And, we hope to do something like that again.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from across the entire spectrum of non-monogamy to hear their fascinating stories. We strive to bring guests on the show who have a healthy approach to non-monogamy. However, it's important to remember that everyone does it a little bit differently, and the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we produce this show for entertainment purposes only. Please be aware that we aren't doctors or therapists. Consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Welcome to episode 227. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have a wonderful interview with John. John actually just released a brand new book called I Am My Beloveds. He talks more about the book in the interview, and you can also find links to the book in the podcast show notes. But we have a wonderful conversation with him about his journey exploring non-monogamy.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me was he talks about transitioning out of his first marriage and how he kept that relationship alive. Like him and his family, his new wife and his former wife and her family, like they've traveled the world together and they go on trips and they do amazing things together. And I think there's just a lot of lessons to be found in there on top of all of the other amazing things that John talks about. So thank you to John for coming on and sharing your story and for writing the book and for everything you're doing out there. So thank you, John.
Before we jump into the interview, we do have a couple of quick announcements per usual. First up, a humongous thank you to our entire Patreon community. It continues to grow, and we're so grateful for each and every one of you. If you're out there looking for like-minded people, we'd encourage you to check out our Patreon community. We have ongoing Mimi chats. We have monthly Q&As, men's and women's groups, and it's just an incredible, supportive group of people. So Go check that out.
And while you're on our website, which is normalizingnonmonogamy.com, all you have to do to find that is click on the Patreon tab.
Good point.
But while you're there, you can also click on the Community Events tab, and you'll find information about our upcoming in-person events in California and New Orleans, as well as our virtual events, which right now we've got a virtual meet and greet coming up on April 23rd. And we're working on putting together another virtual trivia event because the last one was super awesome. And we're super excited about that.
That will be announced very soon.
Yes, next week.
Yes. And while you're on our website, a reminder to please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to come on the show, if you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear it. You can send us an email, send us a voicemail. It's all right there. And we will get back to you. We promise.
Quickly. Most likely pretty quickly, sometimes within a few days. Depends on what the days are looking like.
Exactly.
The last thing we wanted to tell you that you can do while you're on our website is head over to the resources tab, and you will find links to all of the things that Emma and I use to help make our lives better. One of them is stdcheck.com. It is Emma's so excited. It is our favorite way to get tested for STIs. We have used this service for a number of years. We absolutely love it. We are an affiliate partner of theirs, so using this link does help support the show financially, and it also saves you $10, making the cost of a 10-panel test about $130. You get the test, it's super fast, it's super easy, and you get your results texted to you in your online portal within about 24 to 48 hours. So if you're out there getting ready to meet people, we highly recommend using stdcheck.com to know your status and be a better informed partner.
Yes. Let's go now talk to John.
Let's go.
Welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here today. And you reached out to us a little while ago, and it took us a little bit to get you on the calendar, but we appreciate your patience and we're excited to hear all about your story. So for the listeners, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is John Papernick, and I am a novelist living just outside of Boston. I identify primarily as a novelist. That's like the top primary identifier as a writer. I kind of always look at everything in my life through that lens. So yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and we're going to definitely talk about your book, because your book has some non-monogamous themes running through it that I would assume parallel some things in life. So do you maybe want to start by talking about sort of what your relationship sort of dynamic looks like today? And then we can go back in time and find out how we got here, how we got onto a podcast about non-monogamy together.
Absolutely. So I'm married to my second wife, and we're right now basically closed, but we've had lots and lots of talk about, meeting other couples, and we've tried out Field, and we've had a few meetings with people where we've gotten along with them, but didn't get to the next stage where we actually got to get to know them a little bit better. We did meet this really wonderful couple right at the beginning of COVID, and we were already kind of getting in the planning stages. We were like texting each other back and forth, and it really felt like it was going to happen. We really liked each other. And then COVID hit, and she was a doctor who happened to be working at a COVID hospital. And at that point, my wife and they were willing to move forward. But I'll admit, I was like, I can't. I'm just too afraid with where COVID is, because this is, March of 2020, which is very different than where we are today in 2022. So
Yes.
If anyone's to take the blame, it's for me, but I'm going to blame it on COVID. So we've been trying to meet other people, and it can be hard. You kind of start texting somebody and then they kind of disappear. But that's kind of where we're at right now. Just kind of trying to find opportunities to meet other couples, because I think that would work better from my perspective. Something I talk about in my novel is kind of attachment theory, and how each of these characters kind of identify with a certain attachment theory. And my main character is kind of anxiously attached. Which is something that reflects my own experience, which definitely comes from my upbringing. Whereas my wife has a little bit more of a secure attachment style. So she might be a little bit more comfortable. So it's been work. It's been an evolution. And, our relationship is always evolving. So even though we have been closed for the last number of years, the conversation's been ongoing as to how and where we might open it up and have other experiences and meet other people.
Yeah. And how did those conversations initially come up? Like to start thinking about opening your relationship?
They just come up. We're sitting on the couch watching Anderson Cooper, and, my wife's on Field. She's like, I'd be interested in being open at some point. I know that you're a little bit less there, but, certainly, how about this couple? And we kind of, look at their profile, and, if they reach out, respond back to us, we have a dialogue. We have a pretty open dialogue. We don't need to have any kind of special occasion to talk about this. It's just kind of part of the, my wife and I both listen to the Savage Lovecast a lot. So oftentimes we'll kind of pull up things that we'd heard that week and kind of talk about that. And that often leads to discussions that we have about where a relationship is, where it's going. Also, Esther Perel has some really good advice, and the kind of idea that you always need to kind of reevaluate and kind of, re-up every so often your relationship. And so I think we're very much in that kind of realm.
Yeah.
Right. But even the to casually be like, well, we're sitting on the couch watching Anderson Cooper and my wife's on Field. Like, that's a pretty unique paradigm for a lot of people to even consider. So at what point in your relationship with your wife did non-monogamy come up? Like, how did you two start? So how did you get to the point where it's totally cool to be swiping through Field on your phones during the evening news?
That's a good question. My wife and I both met when we were open. We were both at the end of our first marriage. We were each married. We each had and have 2 children. And, my ex-wife and I, who I'm very close with today, we were actually on the phone. She says, "Are you going to talk about me on the podcast?" And I said, "Yeah," because she's still one of my closest friends. And just because we didn't stay married forever and ever doesn't mean that it was a failure. I think we're doing really well right now. We actually took a family trip to Israel with her and her parents and my wife and my dad and my kids. And it was amazing. And, we hope to do something like that again. So we were, our marriage was kind of struggling after about 10 years together. And my wife had suggested something about going open, and I didn't really know if she was serious at that time, but in retrospect, I realized that was the conversation. There was some not quite lack of communication, but lack of clarity. I think I was a little bit timid to really kind of push back and see what that meant. So I didn't really dive in head first for a while. until one of my friends was like, you should go on like OkCupid and meet people there. So I put together a profile and, I started meeting people and, going out, and I met a lot of wonderful people and, had a couple like, relationships that lasted a few months, 4 or 5 months, here and there. And, it was just a really interesting time in my life. It was like a second chance to kind of really kind of experience people with a greater level of maturity than I would have had in my 20s.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And was that literally the only conversation the two of you had about it? Was like she brought it up and then like a couple months?
I don't know. Maybe in my mind's eye it does. But I think we'd had other conversations because, again, me and my ex-wife, we have a very open way of talking. Mm-hmm. But one thing that we never did very well together was talk about sex together and what we wanted from each other. So, in the context of our marriage, I was pretty vanilla. I really couldn't kind of even the concept of wanting something different was a little bit almost alien to me. I kind of grew up pretty shy, a nice Jewish boy in the suburbs of Toronto. And, I had a girlfriend in high school, but, it was just a nice, safe relationship, exactly what I needed at that time. And through my 20s, I bumbled around like most of us do. I don't mean bumbled around because that seems, suggests I was on Bumble, which I wasn't. But, we kind of struggled. We had relationships here and there, and they ended, and other ones came up. But, I didn't really ever think about having specific sexual interests. I kind of thought, sex is pretty good. Who needs to add anything to that? So when I kind of had a second kick at the can in my 40s, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, there's all kinds of things that are really cool and interesting that I am interested in, but I never really allowed myself to ask those questions of myself before. So, yeah, it was a really good experience to get that second kick at the can. So me and my current wife, we met by chance, actually. I'd been going out with a woman for about 5 months who knew I was married, wasn't particularly interested in me being open, but she was interested in pursuing a relationship to see what would happen. And after about 5 months, she's like, I just can't. You're married. I want to start building a life. So she broke up with me. And less than a week later, I was on OkCupid on a Saturday morning. Remember very clearly sitting next to my bed on the floor, leaning back against the dresser, and I saw the profile of my wife, my current wife. And I was like, oh boy, I better write to her right now. I felt this urgency to write to her right at that moment. We were a 99% match. And
wow.
Okay, so it's a bit of a lie. We were a 97% match, but then we answered some more questions and then we became 99. So I wrote like a full essay to her, like referring to things in her bio, and I used proper grammar because I'm a writer, and didn't say anything vulgar or inappropriate. And I hoped that she wrote back. And she did within an hour, and we ended up meeting up, about a week later after a snowstorm, and the rest is history. But the interesting thing is she was going through a divorce at the time and was just on the verge of going off of OkCupid. She thought it's not good to have this kind of clutter in her life while this is going on. So she was just cleaning out her inbox one last time, and she saw my profile, and we connected. So if I'd waited a day or an hour, we would have missed it. So that's one of those really interesting kind of sliding doors examples. You take one door, your life goes this way. You take another door, and your life goes in that direction. So that was a real clear moment when I realized I could have easily missed this connection here.
Yeah.
Seize the moment, right?
Right. Yeah. That's a pretty amazing story there.
Yeah. So my advice is do not wait. Do not
wait.
Right.
If you feel something, act on it. Mm-hmm. Have you, growing up or in your teens and 20s, were you aware of non-monogamy, that open relationships like that was an option?
No, I don't think I don't want to say I don't think I was. I definitely wasn't. Because when I was, I think 21 or 22, I had a girlfriend, but then a woman who I'd been in love with for 2 years finally made her interest known. So I was like, okay. So I ended up having 2 girlfriends for a while. One of them knew, the other one didn't. So I guess I was cheating, but I was also a 21-year-old immature person. So, but eventually I felt guilty and told the girlfriend who didn't know, and we broke up. And it never crossed my mind to say, hey, can we find a way to work this out? I care about you, you care about me. Can we still make this work? You can see other, because, right after that, she went and ended up dating a whole bunch of people, one after the other. And I'm like, well, we could have stayed together maybe, and she could have still done that, but it wasn't part of my paradigm. I didn't really know that such a thing was a thing at that point. So, I very clearly was not aware of that.
Yeah. And when your wife broached the subject with you,
Well, the ex-wife first.
Your first wife.
She was my wife at the time, yeah.
Right, yeah. When she broached the subject with you, like, how did that go? Because if this is sort of coming, like, this is a new model for you. And I can see that also being like, I mean, we get emails from people all the time like, hey, my partner brought this up or I brought this up. And it just totally destabilizes everything because you're like, well, hey, I thought, we took those vows 10 years ago and we're supposed to be the one and only forever and ever. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, you want to open our relationship? Like, that's a big shift.
Yeah, it can be destabilizing. At that point in our marriage, our sex life was pretty dormant. So, I felt a little bit more okay about that. I think a lot of guys, and I was probably one of them, I had some fear for sure. It's like that safety net is yanked away, but also the possibility is like, oh, wow, I could be with other women. But of course, it's challenging, especially when you're, a married father of two in your 40s, no matter what kind of game you bring to the table. It just took me a while for it to really kind of sink in, almost as if I didn't believe she'd said it. But, as we kind of kept talking, it became clear that she was seeing somebody else. And I was like, all right, it is happening. But I still felt guilty going online. It took a while. Like first I tried to just kind of meet people organically. So it took maybe a year and a half or more till I finally had the courage to kind of go on the apps and meet people. So
how did meeting people organically go? Because I feel like a lot of people romanticize that in their head, and then when it comes into fruition, it's not always what we think it might be.
No, it's hard. I did meet somebody organically at a conference, which seems to be a way that all people seem to meet people at a writers' conference, and we met that way and had this kind of long distance relationship for a couple of years, but. She had a boyfriend at the time, and I think she was probably cheating on him. So maybe I was a bad boy there, but I just loved her so much. I loved her like a lot, and I wanted to be with her, but there was no way to really make that happen. So,
right.
We're never perfect. All relationships are flawed, and we can always look back through a lens and wish we had done better.
Sure.
But that was a very meaningful relationship for me. And to be able to have that in my early 40s, really meant the world to me because, when you finally do die at the end of your life, you'd like to say you've had these meaningful experiences. And, I had that. It happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, one thing that people love to point out, and I think there, you might even have somebody listening here going, so you were married for 10 years, you opened your relationship and, oh, wow, what do you know? You got a divorce. Like they love to point at non-monogamy is the reason that you ended up getting a divorce. And I think, just if you're able to speak to that a little bit, like what role do you feel non-monogamy played in your relationship? Whether like we've also talked to people who say like, well, yeah, we hadn't opened up, we'd have been divorced 5 years sooner. Like that's what kept us together for an extra 5 years. So yeah. I'm curious what your take is.
Well, I think divorce was inevitable with us because we just weren't matching on a very important level. But again, I think there's a lot of love in that relationship to this day. So, sure. I met two types of people when I was open. There were the people that were like, married and it turned out to be at the end of their marriage and they were trying something to save it, which I'm sure you've encountered a lot of people with that model. And then people who were really in the lifestyle. And I kind of met both types of people. And, I think we did hang on. I think it extended our marriage out by a couple of years because I did want to get my kids past a certain age a little bit. I didn't want to, I think it would have been an utter tragedy to be divorced when my kids were like 4 and 5 and not seeing them every day. But when they're, now I've got a 14-year-old and an almost 16-year-old, and it's a completely different thing. They can text me on their phones or FaceTime me whenever they want. It's a different kind of thing altogether. So it gave us a couple of extra years, but we divorced without a lawyer, without a mediator. We just went down to the courthouse in Cambridge, Massachusetts together and told the judge we were going to do it this way, and here's how we're going to do it. And he said, well, since you get along so well, that's fine. We walked out, went home, threw a brisket in the oven, had a Passover Seder, and 2 days later I moved out. And that was that. Wow. So, I think we did it in a really interesting way, and just sitting there at that last Passover Seder with, a whole family around and knowing 2 days later I ended up moving in with my current wife, like right away. There was no gap of time there. It worked pretty well. I mean, we all get along. I think next week we may be going to do some trivia, me and my wife and my ex-wife, and perhaps somebody that she's involved with. Though apparently he's not very good at trivia. So,
She needs to update her OkCupid profile so she only gets people who are good at trivia.
But I think she's good enough that she could probably handle it. Like, she's pretty good. She does all the crosswords and is good at that stuff. So,
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I love that like the way that you two approach that and the way that you have kept that friendship, like, right, to think about going on a family trip, not only with your ex-wife, but your ex-wife's family, to that they're welcoming and warm enough to what, like, the transition that you went through with her in this relationship. I think it's really incredible. So
I think it's been a great gift. I mean, we've gone up to visit my in-laws for Passover and Thanksgiving with my wife, and a couple times with my stepdaughters, and they've been extremely welcoming. And I'm grateful that the divorce didn't mean the end of my relationship with my ex-in-laws. I mean, you only get like, I have a father-in-law and a mother-in-law of sorts still. I don't speak to them regularly, but we've seen them a couple times this year already. In the past 12 months, you go for certain occasions. We were up there for Thanksgiving, and it was pretty cool. So. I think that's a really healthy way to go about things. If you can divorce without lawyers and still stay friends, I take immense pride in that. So I don't see the divorce ending and the marriage ending as a failure at all. I just see it as a different way of having that relationship. And I think the relationship's a lot more fruitful now than it was the last 5 years of the marriage.
Yeah.
When we were we were fighting a lot back then, there was a lot of stresses going on. We were under the same roof, and she was sick of me, and, we had younger kids, and now we get along better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you have that perspective of like, okay, that last 5 years, like looking back, like we were surviving, but we weren't thriving together.
Well, we knew it at the time. I mean, we knew it at the time, and we just said, we're going to get through this, and we'll get along better. And we did, and we do.
Yeah. Just found a different way to do it.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. I think there's a quote that I can't remember exactly where I pulled it from. It may have been from a previous interview, but it was basically like being in the relationship that like comes naturally rather than trying to force a relationship that you want, right? That you have this ideal of like, well, we should be married and we should be living in the same house. And it's like, well, hey, like, we work way better when we're not married and not living in the same house. We're better friends. We're maybe better parents, better all around. And it's so hard though to like break out of that, like, man, but everyone expected us to be together forever because, they all came to our wedding and we feel all this pressure to be something that doesn't even work for us. But you found what did, and you made it happen. I really like that. Yeah,
it is a bit of a frightening prospect to think that the person you're with is the last person you're ever going to be intimate with. So I may not be there right now for my wife to like have a relationship with somebody else, and I may never get there, but we'll have the conversation as we go. But I think I could be comfortable, with her, in a same room situation with somebody else, or they can even go in the other room, but what worries me more is the whole idea of like, we're sitting there on the couch watching Anderson Cooper and she's texting this person for 2 hours every night. Like, cause it's harder to be, it's easier to not be present these days with texting and all those sorts of things. So there is some risk there. So I'm trying to find ways where we can do this at a minimal risk, but still have experiences. But again, we'll evaluate this as we go, and maybe it will make more sense a year from now or 2 years, or who knows.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's a lot there. I think too, when you got together with you said you moved out, you moved right in. Mm-hmm. What did then the conversations between you and your then girlfriend, now wife, like, you're both open. You both show up to this new relationship having been open, having been on OkCupid. What was the trajectory there?
Well, we closed that off after about 5 months because I thought, okay, I need to go find another girlfriend. Like, I was still trying to meet other people, and so there was like feelings on both sides and she had someone that she was seeing as well. I mean, she said she had a boyfriend when I met her, and then later on she said, "Oh, it wasn't a boyfriend." And then she's like, "No, it was a boyfriend." So whatever you want to call it, but so she had this other person, and so I was still kind of trying to meet other people, and that wasn't happy making for her at the time. But and it could be chaotic when you're juggling multiple relationships, because there were very brief periods of time where I would be dating a couple of women. Like when I was married, there was a brief time, about 6 weeks, when I had 2 girlfriends and my wife. It was a lot to keep track of, because everybody's got needs and feelings, and it was tough. It was tough. But it was also,
it can be complicated.
It was also fun, though. I will say it was fun. No regrets.
Yeah, complicated but fun.
Right?
Yeah. When you mentioned that you closed up that relationship pretty quickly, but then it's slowly been part of your ongoing discussion. So where, I guess you kind of already answered this a little bit, but maybe you can touch on it a little bit more. Where do you see the two of you going in the future?
I don't know. It's very easy to predict the past, but it's really impossible to predict the future. I mean, I would hope that we'd be able to continue to have a healthy, respectful relationship that has room to evolve, and where we have space to make mistakes as well. So, it's very hard for me to see beyond January right now, because January is so awful. This is a tough year. It's like we're going to our third year of this pandemic, and it's getting hard again. So I don't know. I don't really want to predict, except to say that I hope that we're always good to each other and respectful of each other's needs. I think my needs are a little bit different, again, because of maybe my attachment style. But again, just because it is one way doesn't mean it's inevitable to stay that way. It's just a matter as to how one works their way through that. So
yeah.
Right.
Did you notice those challenges coming up, attachment challenges coming up for you with your ex-wife, and when the two of you opened?
Well, the interesting thing is, no. I think for that, certainly for the first 10 years, I felt very securely attached. I felt very safe, but also not very stimulated. So there was less of a risky life. It was a very safe life, but I felt very, very safe there. So, that had really gone dormant in me, and I'd almost forgotten that I had that anxious attachment style. I mean, I didn't have words for it prior to that, but I was like, oh no, I haven't felt this way since I was in my 20s, So that was a weird feeling, to have these very intense feelings come back that go all the way back to my childhood.
And do you think a lot of that is just the newness of the relationship? Like I don't know how long you've been with your
We met almost
wife.
6 years ago now. In next month, it's 6 years since we've met.
Okay. Yeah. And I was going to ask almost the exact same question that Emma asked. Is like, it's interesting that in the previous relationship, there was not really those jealous or concerns about, maybe she's up on in the evening texting for a couple hours. And now in this new relationship or newer relationship that is there, I think it's just really interesting. And I can almost draw it parallel to something that we're going through, which is similar, which is, in our relationship, I've never felt jealousy or concern about Emma really texting other people or anything like that. But having a newer partner, those feelings, like when I project and like sit and think about it, if I can like even just think about that happening, I feel that like those twinges of like, oh, that's something that's there that's not there with Emma, which is just a really interesting dynamic to just even think about.
Oh, it's amazing to understand how complex we are all psychologically, and what triggers us psychologically. Like I could look at a very specific trigger, I think, that caused this anxious attachment style in me. My parents divorced when I was 5, and I was a latchkey kid without a key. So I'd get into the apartment building, but I couldn't get into the apartment. I'd come home and I'd knock on the door, and I'd buzz the buzzer, and I'd yell through the mail slot, and I'd kick on the door. My mom wouldn't be home. And this happened a lot. I was like a 6-year-old child. And I really think that was that whole sense of like being abandoned, and because those feelings have carried through to where I am now in my life. I'd wander across the street. I lived across from a shopping mall and sit in the bookstore, which may have to do with why I've got a love for books today. But I think those moments at the age of 5 and 6, that is a lot of the time when your attachment style is really kind of firming up. So yeah, I really can look at those moments. I don't know if it was 3 times or 10 times or 20 times, but it feels like it happened a lot. Showing up at home as a very small child and not having my mother be there. And there was a disbelief, like, because I didn't just knock once. I would knock, and I would kick, and I would scream, and I would yell through the mailbox, because there was a psychological disbelief that she wasn't there. I could not get my head around it. So clearly that was something that really dug deep grooves in me psychologically.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes, it's interesting how different life experiences, different other people, and also age, like, will bring out those experiences again, or highlight those experiences again. And sometimes you can't necessarily put your finger on, this is what happened and it caused this, but it just happens from those memories get brought up or those feelings get brought up in different ways for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was intense to realize that. My mother passed away about 12 years ago, and she was a very challenging person. When I saw the previous president kind of operating on the world stage as this kind of mega narcissist, I saw certain aspects of that in my mother, and it was really kind of frightening. It was like to see that these kind of connections, the similarities, not as bad, not in a malignant way, but certainly in a way that really fucks you up as a kid, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine. And I think too, like you said, like it's interesting that it's poking up here in this new relationship, but maybe not as much in the previous one. And I think it's just interesting. And so thank you for talking about that a little bit. And I think too, like having that ongoing conversation with your wife too, right? About like, hey, you said like maybe she's a little more willing or interested in like going forward and maybe meeting some other partners for maybe more of like a dating romantic side. And you're sort of like, well, hey, let's meet here right now. Like, let's maybe do it together and maybe we build to that, which again is interesting because you were there, you did that. You had 2 girlfriends and a wife and you've done the dating and now I don't think it's a regression, but it's just a new approach.
No, I think there could be a really good model for this. If we were to meet a couple that we really liked, and we got together with them every month or so, I mean, that kind of thing I think could work really nicely. Something like that where we do have it, together, and then we could have it separately, within the little meetings and stuff like that. But again, it's been challenging, during COVID for sure. And again, I feel like there were some opportunities to like do some things early on, like to some parties that we were going to go to, and then one or the other of us got cold feet and didn't end up going to that either. So, we've tiptoed our way, and I think we're ready to take a bigger stride. I think if we could just find the right opportunity.
Sure.
Yeah, you'll get there.
Sure.
If you want to, if you both want to.
I think it'll be fun to try for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's some risk, but I think risk is what makes it so gratifying, I think.
Right.
For sure.
How have you seen yourself? I know we've talked a little bit about, the anxious attachment and those challenges, but how have you seen yourself grow since you started down the non-monogamy path in the first place?
How have I seen myself grow? I don't know. I guess like a greater sense of gratitude, because each of these relationships are things that, because again, once I was married, there was that assumption that I was never going to be with anybody else. Then realizing that I got to be with all of these people, I'm very grateful that I got to have these experiences, meet these people, go to these places. Because living in Boston in my 40s, like I don't really have like male friends. I don't really have people to hang out with. So, to go out with somebody and go swimming at Walden Pond, or to go here, to go there, I suddenly had like new people to go places with, which was kind of cool as well. So I guess just kind of gratitude to have those experiences and to realize that there's all kinds of like really interesting people out there that you can connect with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and maybe another thing to kind of touch on is you said like, hey, I'm a married man in my 40s with 2 kids. And like, that's a tough sale sometimes on the dating sites, the dating apps. But you've also said like, hey, I had 2 girlfriends and a wife and multiple other partners along the way. Like how did you make that happen? How did you overcome that? Like, hey, I'm the married father of 2 who's also dating, which is a really unique thing to pop up on an app. But it sounds like you've worked with that and made it an advantage rather than a hurdle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was difficult. I mean, as you know, like my, good example would be like my wife, when she wasn't my wife, she would go on OkCupid on a Saturday morning and there'd be like 30 or 40 direct messages. I probably would get 1 or 2 people reaching out to me a month, if that. Mm-hmm. So I would always have to do the reaching out, and there was no space to be anything other than perfect in what I wrote to them. And as a writer, I think I had an advantage there for sure, because I think a lot of people don't know how to treat people properly on apps. So the fact that I was respectful and used proper grammar probably helped a lot. I think I'm not bad looking. I think that helped as well. And just being open to, whatever was on offer there, I guess. And I was pretty determined. I felt a real need for this. At a certain point, I felt a need to connect with other people. So it was a priority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, like, we get that sort of that exact question a lot. Like, hey, I'm on the apps and my wife's on the apps and her thing is like maxed out. She can't accept any more messages because like she's broken it and I can't get a single damn message. But I think the advice we often give people is like, it's a numbers game. It's endurance, tenacity. You just kind of have to keep plugging away at it, and you try something, you try it a little different the next time. Like you said, write full sentences and take interest in what they're interested in. And but it is a lot of just doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah, my sense was, and maybe I'm wrong, that a lot of people on the apps are just kind of assholes that don't know how to behave. So again, I think there's such a breath of fresh air that women will feel when you write to them, and it's like, oh my God, they're not talking about their dick, or they're not like insulting me or nagging me or anything like that. And, I think that was a big help for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad that the bar's that low.
It is that low. It's definitely that low from what I've heard from all the people I've spoken to, for sure.
Right. Yeah. Well, he reached out and it wasn't a dick pic, so we went to dinner. Like,
right.
Really? That's all I had to do?
Yep. No, I mean, it was, but again, as a writer, like, this is a fun way to kind of write, because there's a playfulness to it. There's a potential interlocutor at the other side of what you're writing, and you need to do it really well in order to get somebody's attention, especially when somebody's inbox is full.
Right.
Because I was fully aware of that. It's like, this is going to be tough. But there was, I had people write back to me that I thought, wow, they're probably not going to write back. And they did, Like, there was a woman dressed in a Imperial Stormtroopers outfit with bondage tape. And it was like, oh my God, so hot. And she wrote back to me, and we actually went out 3 or 4 times. She was like deep in the scene. She had a husband and a boyfriend, and we were having discussions about bringing me on as like a third person. But then she'd gone to some like, in some other state, she'd gone to some kind of like, I don't know, picnic or barbecue thing. And she met somebody else there. And she said, oh, I met somebody. And I said, well, would you like me to step aside? And she said, well, clearly you don't understand my viewpoint and how I feel about this. I don't think we should pursue the romance anymore. And I was like, that was weird. I thought I was being, I don't know what I thought I was being, but clearly, so we didn't pursue it beyond that. I guess
that's an interesting weird, that's a strange
reaction.
Well, maybe she'd already decided that she wanted to be with this other person as a third person that didn't want to hurt my feelings and maybe kind of put it back on me. Because we had really laid the groundwork. We spent a lot of time texting, a lot of time talking on the phone, talking about what sex would be like if we did it. I swear to God, her and her husband even sent me a spreadsheet with all the things I would do, wouldn't do, what my level of interest was. I filled out the spreadsheet. Then she wrote back. She said, oh, my husband thinks you're hilarious. He loves your answers. So like I was being vetted pretty seriously there. We'd met once at a BDSM picnic. We went out for a walk, and we were sitting on the grass together. And I said, can I put my hand on your leg? And she said, no. And I said, that's fine. And then later on, she said, you passed the test. You respected my boundaries. And so there was a lot of work being done on both our sides there, kind of gauging each other. So, it was kind of quick shift to like, I met somebody else. I'm like, well, that's okay. Do you want to be with them? And then her being like, hey, maybe we should just call this off, was surprising for me. So, I did my best, but again, I wouldn't call it unsuccessful. We ran out a few times, and, it's not often when you're a married man in your 40s, when you have 2 women in the same day tell you that they've been masturbating to you that day. Because that happened 2 different times with 2 different pairs of women. I was like, okay, she masturbated to me. That's good. I can put that on my resume, like, we definitely like, right? we talked about sex. We talked about relationships. We talked about ourselves, and we both probably masturbated to each other. So that's like not worth sex, but maybe 1/4 of the way to sex if you both do it.
I think that's pretty vulnerable to admit. Like, yeah, like, and I think that's really awesome. Like, and it's so interesting. And you keep saying like, hey, that wasn't a failed relationship. Like, we just kind of came to a place where like it didn't make sense anymore. And could the dismount have been maybe a little smoother or kinder? sure, but
Yeah,
like the fact that you
it
come
could have
out of
been.
it.
She wasn't great, but I wasn't great either. I was texting one of my friends, and she's like, "Oh, you should say goodbye, Felicia. Bye, Felicia." So I was like, "What does that mean?" So I looked it up, and then I wrote "Bye, Felicia" to her, and then she's like, "Who's Felicia?" And then that was the end of it. So if you could look that up. So I didn't know what that meant at the time. I had one of my millennial friends tell me to say that. So yeah, I wasn't perfect by any means, but I wasn't a total dick either.
Learning experiences,
right?
It was,
right.
And frankly, like, I don't know, like that would have been tough to handle. She had a husband and a boyfriend, and like I actually think psychologically, I would always have been okay with people who are already present. For example, one of the women I was seeing, she had two other partners, and I was totally okay. She's like, Saturday night I fucked this person, Sunday I fucked them. But then she broke up with them, and when she wanted to see other new people, suddenly that felt bad. Isn't that weird? It's like, I'm okay with you fucking the people you already knew, but fucking new people makes me feel weird. So clearly there's a way to kind of train yourself psychologically to figure out that you can be maybe comfortable with more things than you otherwise would be.
Right.
And not the first time we've heard that.
No.
Very interesting. Like, yeah, I was okay. Like, I came into this relationship and I knew they had a husband or a wife or a partner.
Well, because you're kind of signing on for what you know.
Right.
It's the unknown that can be triggering.
So even if you know they're open to it, right? To be like, well, hey, now there's this new person, and it's like, it's different. I think it's different when you're the one who's coming into an established dynamic versus somebody's coming into your established dynamic. And
it was really interesting to learn that. Again, one of the things that being open did was it let me learn so much about myself and other people, because other people, you walk by a beautiful woman on the street and that's it. You walk by the beautiful woman on the street that you met on OkCupid that you're now sleeping with, you get to see their vulnerabilities. And it's an amazing thing to realize, like, because there was a woman I went out with for 5 months, the one that broke up with me just before I met my current wife. And she worked like right around the corner from where I work. Like it was a 60-second walk. And we probably walked past each other back then. And then suddenly realizing that the curtain's been pulled back and you're in her bedroom and you get to, be with her sexually, but also learn about her. It's an amazing thing, again, as a writer to kind of like, know these other characters that were characters that hadn't revealed themselves before. Now they're dimensional characters to you. So it was really amazing to kind of meet people and get to know them. Because I think you can, when you're intimate with people, you get to know them on a higher level than, or at least certainly quicker than non-intimate friendships, where it may take a lot longer to get to that level of intimacy, if ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a super valid point. Like, there is just some level of curiosity about who is this person, this random stranger. You got a couple of pictures online and maybe a paragraph about him, but there's a whole lot more than that. Like you can never completely sum yourself up in your online profile or in something that brief. So there's definitely an intimacy there and a vulnerability.
Yep,
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
How open are you about your non-monogamy journey with other people in your life?
Well, I don't like wave a flag, but on the other hand, I talk about it, with people pretty openly. Like I don't, it's not a secret, but it's also something I don't want to necessarily I don't want that to identify me because it was something that I explored and experienced. But, I don't think I've talked to my children about it, but I think they know something was going on because you don't just move in with a woman 2 days after you move out. They must have known something. But I'm pretty open. I've talked to lots of people about it. But it's not I'm not trying to be like a missionary to try and promote this as a lifestyle. It was just a really interesting thing, and I think it works better for different people. But I think it's an amazing kind of thing that this is becoming more and more acceptable. When I sat down to write my novel, I Am My Beloveds, I very much had in mind one of my favorite novels by Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was an American writer who wrote in Yiddish and won the Nobel Prize. He wrote a really great novel called Enemies, A Love Story. And it was set in New York, pretty much a Yiddish-based New York after the Holocaust, and everybody was a Holocaust survivor. And he ended up having 3 different relationships. It was his wife, then his dead wife wasn't dead. She'd come back from Europe, and then the woman he was going to marry. And it was just all these sorts of things. And in many ways, it almost felt like an infidelity kind of novel. And I thought, well, to update something like this for our generation, I think the infidelity novel is past. And now we're talking about the open marriage or the open relationship model. So it was really kind of updated. A previous generation, it would have been about cheating, perhaps, which is a completely different thing. But to have the complexities of multiple romantic connections in your life and all of the joys and chaos/plot points it can lead to.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good transition to just talk about your book for a few minutes of what what you did write about, what your novel's about.
Sure. Well, it's called I Am My Beloveds, with no apostrophe. I Am My Beloveds is something that comes from, I think, the Song of Songs, and you'll often see that on like Jewish marriage certificates or sometimes engraved on the inside of a wedding ring. I'm not going to say it in Hebrew because I'll mess it up. But there would be the apostrophe, I am my beloved, apostrophe S. And for my book, I did it, I am my beloveds with no apostrophe, which again, the main character, his name is Ben Seidel. And again, he has this very kind of anxious attachment style. So he has his wife and he ends up meeting another woman that he falls in love with. And really, by him being his beloveds, he's very much identified with them. Like his fate is tied to them. His psychological fate is tied to them. But it starts after the main character's wife ends up asking to go open and then immediately has a girlfriend. And he spends about a year in the wilderness, really, really struggling the way that we kind of briefly talked about how it can be difficult for a man on the apps to kind of find their way. And but she helps him out. She's like, let me look at your Tinder profile. Let's fix that up. Let's do this. Let's do that. So there's a lot of support there, but he does feel a little bit abandoned. Because, she admits later, she's like, yeah, maybe I was a little selfish because I wanted to take this thing that was here for me. But, I also want you to be happy. And ultimately, he meets somebody and then he falls in love with her. And he's kind of juggling both of these relationships. In the meantime, his wife is unable to get pregnant. So they come up with this kind of scheme as to how to do a surrogacy sort of situation. And it becomes rather complex. But, I think what I am most proud of in this book is that the characters are very dimensional. The three primary female characters are real complex human beings. I think a lot of the time when people write about kind of polyamory or things like that, maybe you'll see it in like a science fiction format or maybe almost as thinly veiled porn. There is some hot sex in the book and other dirty stuff that you need to read. But it was always a book about human beings, and what they need and what motivates them and things like that. So it was a helpful journey. I mean, I'd say it's like almost 100% fiction, but yet it's also 100% drawn from where I was kind of psychologically. Like very few of the things in this book actually happened in my life, because the job of a fiction writer, when they say write what you know, they don't mean transcribe exactly what you've done, but kind of take that kind of psychological space and kind of put it into those. So I feel immensely proud of it. It comes out at the beginning of March, and I'm hoping a lot of people read it. But you know how difficult it is these days. There's so many things vying for our attention. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that I don't read a book before bed. I jump on Netflix and watch the latest series I've been wanting to watch. So, it's going to take some work to find some readers for this. But I think it's a book that people will enjoy. They're characters that are warts and all. They're not like there to be like model human beings. So they're challenging people, just like we all are. And I hope people fall in love with them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that overview, and we will put links to buy your book in the show notes as well, so people
are more than welcome to pre-order it or order it afterwards. And if anyone ever wants to do it for a book group, I love talking to people, as you can see. So I'd be happy to talk to a book group or anything like that. But I think I do appreciate that, and I think it's a book that people will like. But it's not a guide. It's not a guidebook to be like, how will I show my non-poly people how this works? Because that wasn't the goal of the book. The goal was to show human beings going through a certain kind of relationship model. So if you wanted to show that to, your parents are having trouble understanding the lifestyle, it's not going to be helpful in that way necessarily. That was never the purpose. I always write about human beings and their desire first. And, the real ambition of the book comes out through wherever the characters take me.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I love that you said the characters are flawed and you think you said warts and all, right? And I think that it's probably tempting as an author to be like, to create these amazing perfect bot humans, right? Because you can create any character you want, but I think having lived the experience you did of being out on the apps and seeing who are all the hundreds of people you've looked through and what this actually looks like in real life versus like what people fantasize or fictionalize it in their brains of like, it's, we talked to a lot of people who are like, well, I didn't want to go to the sex party because I figured it was just going to be all these beautiful people who are perfect in every way. And like you go to a party or you go to a club and it's like the gamut from every end of the spectrum.
Well, that's the amazing thing that you see that people of all types and ages and body types are really comfortable. And I really admire that because, again, I was a pretty shy kid growing up. And, it's just amazing to see people just being comfortable as they are. And that comfort can be sexy in its own right, being comfortable in your own skin. One thing I do want to say about the book, still, I've got a friend who's published a number of books, and she went to Yale and has a law degree and speaks 5 languages. So she's smart. And she'd also been like open and did all kinds of like kink stuff. And she said, the Shira's girlfriend, the other character in the book, is she based on somebody? And I said, no, she's 100%, created from my imagination. And the fact that this person, thought that this could have been based on a real person really says that I've done my job in creating a dimensional character. Because you sit down as a writer, as a god in miniature, and you look at your blank screen and you say, let there be, and you make it happen. But it takes years, draft after draft after draft to make them dimensional. You can't just breathe air into them and they exist. It takes a lot of work to make them exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing that work and for creating the book and coming on and sharing a little bit about your story and your history. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet today that you wanted to make sure that you got out there in the world before we let you go? And
I wanted to get through this podcast without saying anything stupid that I'd regret. I don't think I've done it yet. So if you wanted to ask me a couple more questions to see if I can expose myself.
I mean...
the blooper question.
Yeah, we can throw a blooper question at you. If you've got a funny story, it doesn't have to be sexual, but just a blooper that's happened along the way as you've been navigating this. Those are always fun to hear about. But
I had a bunch, but one really small one, and this did end up in the novel. I went out on a second date with this woman, and she was talking about how she was into CBT. And are you into CBT? I'm like, yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy is awesome, right? But she meant cock and ball torture. And I was like, that I'm not into. And she wasn't the first person. There was a number of women who were interested in that, wanted to like tie it up and put it in this little box. I'm like, that doesn't appeal to me. It was the whole concept was new to me. So, I was like, no, I'm not into that. But cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm gonna give a shout out to that for sure. So it's interesting because there's a lot of lingo you get out there, right? And again, especially being like a 40-something-year-old man who's been in a closed marriage and wasn't that experimental in his teen years and 20s, and suddenly having like to read all these acronyms and know what they all stand for. And I think I got pretty good at it. It's interesting how you start to roll with things and your new reality is like, yep, that's cool. That's what it is. Doesn't work for me, but I can engage with that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's interesting. And that's actually, I was going to ask you a follow-up question because you'd said, in your teens and 20s, like life was fairly secure, but it was also like, you didn't even know what it was to like want a specific thing or explore that. And
I'll tell you one thing. I knew I liked women in leather. I did know that. I mean, leather. Nice. Awesome. I did know that. But now I'm very I was in Toronto a few months ago with my friends, and it was November, and I said, "Could we go somewhere where we could see women in leather?" And so we went to this one street, and where there's like lots of nightclubs. I swear to God, we saw 45 women wearing leather pants in like 2 hours, and I was just very much enjoying looking at that. Because like you could go months in Boston without seeing somebody in leather pants. So it was just very thrilling. I was like, this is a really great thing. So, I can get through just by seeing it. I don't even have to do anything. Just seeing the thing.
Right.
So, that happened. So when I go back to Toronto, of course, if it's summer, there won't be leather. But that was a great moment in my life. And it might even end up on my tombstone. Went to Toronto, saw 45 women wearing leather in one night.
Was really happy.
It was an amazing thing. It was really fun.
Well, and that you answered my question, because I was going to say, like, did you feel now over the last many years where you've explored more that you actually have that sense of things that you want and things that you like that you didn't in your 20s?
Yes, but I still think there's more of a ways to go. I still think there's something blocking me. Like we've tried some pretty intense stuff. Like we've done like pegging and anal and some BDSM and stuff like that. And it's interesting stuff. And again, once you kind of get calmed down into the calmness of your marriage, it's easy to kind of slip back into vanilla stuff. So you have to kind of carve out time for these desires and stuff like that. So again, that's something we kind of want to get back to a little bit, be a little bit more mindful of like setting aside an evening for it, not just like 20 minutes between Anderson Cooper and whoever,
Well, perhaps CBT is the key to unlocking it all.
Well, certainly one form of CBT is working for me. We'll see about the other kind for sure.
I tell you what, that's one. I was just imagining this scenario where like the woman's got you like tied down and blindfolded and is like, so are you into CBT? And you're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden it gets real painful real quick. And you're like, whoa. I think we miscommunicated here.
Well, I will say the nice thing I've learned is that people that are kind of, into some more intense stuff have been extremely respectful of like following all the boundaries. I mean, I've never seen people more by the book than in that scene. And I think that's an amazing thing, which should make anybody who's been hesitant about dipping their toe into the water to know that if you find the right person, then there's many right people out there that really take this seriously, that you will be taken care of, and that it's not pain for pain's sake, it's pain for pleasure's sake.
For sure. Yeah. And I was not intending to disparage anybody in the BDSM or kink community that would do that. I don't think
you were. I'm just trying to kind of clarify a little bit more. Another thing that I kind of have taken out of this experience that I've seen pretty much across the board.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and we hear that all the time, is like consent. Like if you like consent reigns king, queen, whatever in the BDSM sphere, like above all else. And so, it's really good to hear that your experience has been that as well. For sure.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? Or do you have any other questions?
You just know if I keep talking, eventually I'll say something that gets me in trouble. So we could stop. But, as I mentioned before the podcast started, that my superpower is talking, and I love to talk. So, as long as you want to talk, I would do it. But I think we've covered a lot of ground here. And I've really enjoyed speaking with you both. And I hope that people kind of seek out my novel, I, My Beloveds, and check it out. And if you read it, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I always love to hear from my readers. This is my 5th book. I guess I could talk about this. It's my 5th book, but it's the first time I've really talked about something relationship-based. A lot of my other books are very dark, very violent. This book is not dark, and nobody dies. There's no body count except for the bodies on the beds. So it's been a real change of pace for me, and I'm currently writing a sequel for it. So hopefully that will be done at some point. And we'll see if it ever gets picked up by somebody who wants to turn it into a streaming series, because that's something my agent is looking into. I think that would be awesome. I've already got people picked out that I think would be really good for it in a fantasy world, of course. But, I would love to hear from anybody who wants to reach out. I'm always happy to interact with people.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
your contact information will be in the show notes.
Oh, there you
Indeed.
go.
And thank you again for reaching out, John, and for coming on and for sharing everything, for doing the work, and for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And we're back.
Whoa, stealing my line.
I had to. I stole your line at the end of the intro. And you wait till the end of this one.
Nope.
This outro. I'm taking your sign-off line too.
Anyway, are you going to keep talking, or should I?
No, this is your turn now. The way it works is you now talk for the next minute and a half, and then I say, bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
No, that's not how it works. I talk in the outro, too. Anyway, we'll stop rambling here. Thank you, John, for coming on the show and sharing your story, and for the work you do, too, and the books that you've written. We had an amazing time talking to you and really appreciate you sharing. So thank you.
Thank you, John. We greatly appreciate it, and we're excited to get your book out there and hope everybody is loving it.
A quick reminder, go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. You can find podcast show notes there where you'll find links to John's book, but you'll also find information on our Patreon community, our upcoming virtual events and in-person events, our favorite resources, and the ability to contact us. Send us a voicemail, send us an email. It's all right there. We'd love to hear from you. And I think that's it. Next week, we have an interview with Layla, who is amazing, and we're super excited. We actually did an interview on her podcast as well.
Yeah, her podcast is called The Curious Girl Diaries, and it sort of chronicles her journey coming out of a 3.5-year dry spell.
Yeah.
And what she's done with that. And so we go on there and talk about our story, but we have her on to share hers, and it's a great conversation, and we're super excited about that.
So come back next week and listen, and we'll see you then.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everyone.
No, you can't keep doing it. I had to do the last one.